Hi, my name is Grant Moniger. I'm the creative director at the American Cinematheque. I'd like to welcome you to the Q&A of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom with director George C. Wolfe, moderated by Courtney B. Vance. Enjoy.
Hello, Mr. George.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I got a whole bunch of questions to ask you. So I'm pushing my little thing back so I can, it looks like my head is cut off. Does it look like my head is cut off?
No,
It
it
does.
looks fine. You look very handsome and striking looking. Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. George, I got a lot of questions, so we're going to keep these questions to 3 to 5 minutes, okay? So that we can get everything, all this beauty in.
So I have to answer everything in 3 to 5 minutes.
Yes.
No,
If you can, if it's possible, George.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll try. We'll see. We'll see.
So here we go. In 2013, you cast me in Nora Ephron's Lucky Guy, starring Tom Hanks. I was very nervous. I had heard much about you, but we were in different orbits. I was in the Yale School of Drama, Lloyd Richards, August Wilson world. And for some certain reason, I could find nothing on my character, Hap Harrison. There were no books or information. So at the beginning of rehearsals, I decided to just observe and write down everything you said about my character and the tabloids, New York tabloids of the 80s and 90s. It was very interesting for me to watch the process of us as actors letting go of trying to show you how smart we were about our characters and the play. It was completely fascinating watching you, on the other hand, slowly refocusing all of our attention on the work and on trusting you. Trust, as a director, has the necessity of having to prove yourself to producers, your cast, critics, audiences, etc., always been a part of your journey?
Well, I don't think it's so much about trying to prove. I just think the time that I love most on any project is the period of not knowing. And so, because in the not knowing, you're going to stumble upon something that is hopefully deeper and darker and more complicated and richer. And one of the things that I firmly believe, whether I don't care if it's film, I don't care if it's theater, I don't care if it's whatever form, I believe the audience can tell when they are in the presence of a truth that was discovered just for them. And they can tell when an actor, a director, a designer is recycling an old truth that they've figured out on another project. Right. So the process of asking questions and digging and questioning and pulling apart is less so that it's less about trust me, and it's more so let's make ourselves available to not knowing. And right. So that therefore we all begin the journey and we go on this journey and we will discover, things about what we preconceived that are valuable. And then there are things that we preconceived that are standing in the way of us getting at a deeper, more complicated truth.
Right, but George, that is a very big problem for some actors, the not knowing, the kindergarten moments. And that's for me, I like going back there. I know I have to begin there, not knowing anything and building it. But some people like to memorize the whole script before they show up. And that could present a problem for you, yes?
Well, if one in the theater, if it's a new work, no, you can come prepared. You can come having all your muscles ready to go, and then the journey begins. And then the journey, and then the discovery begins. And then, one of the things that was really fortunate about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is we had a 2-week rehearsal period. Mm-hmm. We had a full 2-week rehearsal period where the actors where I sort of roughly staged, a number of scenes with the band. They didn't end up being staged the way they were when they were for camera, but just to keep people up on their feet moving. I asked a lot of questions, we explored, so that therefore it could be, so that it was a time of grounding. It was a time of building a sense of ensemble. It was a time of making the band feel like a band in terms of their familiarity. It was a time for digging into that language and becoming so completely familiar and free inside of the language that in many respects rendering not only my work, but August's work invisible. So you're watching these complicated human beings, dancing in the moment and then altering and changing and understanding who they are based on how someone is responding to them. The film also required that we were going to spend X amount of time in this band room So I passed on, I passed on this idea to the actors that every single thing in the band room is like a boxing match. And instead of throwing punches, we're throwing language. And so that therefore there's a perpetual sense of figuring out when you've scored a point, when you're losing, when you're gaining something, and when you're not. One of the things I talked with Viola about is that, she's playing chess. The guys downstairs, are boxing. It's one of the reasons why working with the production designer, he had a slightly larger room, and it was a rectangle, and I made it into a square so that those 4 columns there became the ring. And it's how I talked to the DP and everybody involved with this boxing concept, so that it became very clear what the imagery was that we were playing with. And versus with Ma, who is much more of a strategist and smarter and more sophisticated in her thinking and in her process of how she was going to deal with the white power structure. She's perpetually not only just making moves herself, but being aware of the moves that the other person is thinking about working. So in this discovery process, that's what was going on in that 2-week rehearsal period. So that by the time we started filming, everybody was grounded in a very.
Everybody was grounded, and you're a master at that, because that our cast, Lucky Guy, we're still in touch with each other, birthdays, holidays. So that's a testament to you. Your portfolio spans a variety of media, plays, even curatorial work. You're considered a renowned actor's director and a master storyteller. You've won a total of 5 Tony Awards for your film and TV work, for Lackawanna Blues, Henrietta Lacks, and of course our Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Many of your works are focused around themes of Black history and civil rights education. How do you view this film as an extension of your work in these arenas?
Well, it's connected and not connected. I mean, ironically enough, I do not know why, but I seem to keep finding myself back in the 20s a lot. Because I think it's a really fascinating period, because it's a period of extraordinary, discovery and expansion and power. And at the same time, there was incredible racial brutality going on. So you have this moment in history where Black artists and Black thinkers and political figures are reaching this zenith of power and command, and at the same time, an incredible moment of brutality that was, there were that almost daily lynchings happening in the South. So I find that dynamic really interesting. And also I think the 20s, for me, was the first time that America evolved. Jazz gave America its own language, and it wasn't impersonating a European language. And that language and that music of jazz gave freedom to all sorts of writers, Langston Hughes as well as F. Scott Fitzgerald. So it was like America finding itself. And when America finds itself, generally there's this incredible sense of possibility, and at the same time, there's also this extraordinary sense of the horror that has delivered it to this moment. So I find it really intriguing and fascinating. So that's one of the things I'm really drawn to the 20s about, is because it's an explosion and at the same time a confrontation with that which is unresolved. So I'm really fascinated by people who exist, just characters, period, Black, white, whatever, people who exist in defiance of the boundaries that other people would like to impose on them. I'm really
That's definitely mine.
I'm very much that. It's very much so my. In part because the stories when I was growing up, the stories that were shared with me were stories of defiance, the stories of people breaking rules, the stories of people saying, no, I'm not doing that, I'm doing this. And yes, there were consequences, but those were the stories that were passed on to me. And in many respects, that's how I sort of lived my life, and very specifically my career. So I'm really drawn to stories of people altering the structures so that they can be free to become who they need to become.
Well, that's definitely, so it's really, with those two, the juxtaposition of Ma and Levy, the people, and they're battling about their no's. They're not taking no, they're not obeying anybody. That's why the play, the movie blows up the way it does. The film strikes a beautiful balance of honoring and elevating August's work, while very much being a product of your vision. Two things are slightly different from the play. Number one, you set the story in the summer.
Yeah.
And number two, the characters are much more defined. Ma, Sylvester, Dusty May. Can you talk to us about some of the choices and other details you added to propel this film version?
Well, you know, the summer thing was really fascinating to me because urban, you know, it was very important to me that we established Ma's power base. I was just struck by the line at one point she says to Irving, because I don't like it up here anyhow, so I can take my black ass back down south, you know, where I belong. And so you have Ma Rainey going in one direction back down south, and you have 100,000 Black people going from the south to the north. So I became really fascinated about what is that? And I thought we needed to know that. We need to know our power base. And so that's why I created, for lack of better words, the opening sequence, a prologue, if you will, so we could see her in her element. So we could see her, see that she is a preacher, if you will, with a congregation that is obeying and following and finding their story inside of her song. So that became very important to me. So that therefore, when she's in Chicago and she's confronting the policeman or she's confronting Irving or Sturgeon, she's not doing it from a place of sass. She's doing it from a place of power. I'm in charge. I'm in charge in my world. And even though I'm now in your world, I'm still going to be in charge. And it's a battle. And she fights very long and very hard to maintain it until at the end of the film, she has to sign that contract. And she's acutely aware with the signing of that contract is a loss of power. But she's going to make everybody work and adjust and recalibrate their understanding of how the world works up until that moment. Levy, it becomes really fascinating to me because Levy is the future. He is smart, he is savvy. That was the thing that was very, very important to me. I wanted to make sure that we understood that Levy was bright and charismatic and charming, and he has everything going for him except for the power structure that wants to take away his power, and also the damage that he is wearing deep inside because he experienced trauma, racial trauma, at an age where he had no equipment, no information, or no one to protect him and to give him clues as to how he could survive it. So to me, the ultimate tragedy is that Ma is facing an end of her career because her career has been usurped by Bessie Smith, and it's also being usurped by a different, trend in music. It's no longer going to be for the next, 10 to 15 years. It's no longer going to be about the female singer. It's going to be about the band leader and his band, Duke Ellington and his orchestra, Jimmy Lunsford and his band. So that trend is happening, and Levy understands that. And if Ma and Levy
could get together,
if Ma has the survival skill set, this is how you deal with people. This is how you check them. This is how you inform them. He needs that information, and she needs his sense of musicality so that she understands, so that therefore she could survive and incorporate what she does brilliantly with a new sound that is coming along. But they're both threatened by each other.
And it's so painful, George, to see. It's so painful to see that they're just hovering around each other, needing each other, and then you cut to the end where you see that they used his music.
Yes.
The white band leader used his music, and we crumble because of that.
Yes. Because that, it was also because hopefully the thing which I really wanted the audience to do is I wanted the audience to fall in love with Levy, so that therefore his tragedy becomes our tragedy. We all know the stories. We all know the Big Mama Thornton saying you ain't nothing but a hound dog, but it became Elvis Presley song. We know those in the abstraction, and we know them, and if you and we read about them, we understand them. I thought here was the chance to actually see this happen to a young, bright, brilliant young man, so that we feel it and we get it. It's not an academic discovery. It's something that happened to a human being. There are two deaths. I mean, I think there are three. I think there's what happens with his bandmate and Levy over the shoes. I think there's what happens to Ma in terms of signing that contract, which is a death to her of the sorts because she loses control. And the film is set in 1927. Ma Rainey didn't record anything again after 1928.
Wow.
And then the other death is the death of Levy's brilliance, of the potency and the power, and his brilliance gets taken from him. Levy is, I've said this a number of times, Levy to me is America. Levy is the possibility. Levy is, yes, he's embodiment of a Black man in relationship to white world, but I think he's embodiment of America. It's all this promise, all this possibility, and the scars of the past. Will the scars of the past keep him from reaching and achieving the promise of what he and this country could do?
I want to bring it to you brought up about America, and in light of we see all of these things. We see there's so many levees that we've seen that have been snatched from us. Absolutely. George Floyd was the epitome of a levee snatch. In seeing all that, what's the role of that art and artists play in helping us ensure that the fabric of our country stretches, but it doesn't tear in this fragile experiment called the democracy? How does art, where do artists play a hand in making sure that in the future, the levees of the world, that they're not snatched, the George Floyds are not snatched? How does Ma Rainey's of the world help in that?
Well, I believe firmly, I firmly believe that art has this responsibility to empower. It's in Hamlet, there's a bunch of dead bodies all over the place. And then Fortinbras says we've got to go forward. And it was very interesting. We did a preview. I was just talking about this earlier today with a friend of mine. We did a preview in Atlanta, and we came to the end of the film and what happens with Levy stabbing and all of that, and then we had the band play, and then the credit music played for maybe 8 seconds, and then the lights came up, and the audience was enthralled by the film, leaning in, listening, and then they felt violated. They felt violated because, and this one man said, it was very interesting. This one man said to me, he said, you live in the world and you come home from work and then you got to turn this on. He says, he didn't say I'm devastated, but that's in essence what he was saying. And the film—
He was devastated by what? He was devastated by what?
By the end of the film. And the thing which was interesting is then it became like, so what's missing? And then, so what I decided to do was track down these photographs of Ma Rainey, the actual Ma Rainey, which, as it turns out, there are a total of 7 photographs of her.
Wow,
Here.
Just 7.
That's it.
Why?
Nobody took pictures of her. There's billions of singers from that time period. There's tons of them, and they're all over the place. It's also because I think she went south to the Chicago thing, whereas Bessie Smith did the New York journey, and she was claimed by the white intellectuals. Sitting beside the chair where Ma Rainey sits is a copy of Vanity Fair from 1926. I had props make it a 1927 issue. And in that issue, Carl Van Vechten writes about the 3 greatest blues singers, Clara Smith, Ethel Waters, and Bessie Smith. And I just had it sitting there, taunting Ma Rainey. Viola never opened it up, but I just wanted it on the table because she was a sign that history was already not going to be kind. But in any case, by having those pictures of her there, and by hearing her recording of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, it became a bit of a sort of sonic sorbet, if you will. Horrible metaphor, but we get the idea.
Sonic sorbet. Go ahead.
Just in the sense that, so that therefore, witnessing what happened to Levy, witnessing what happens in the band room, but her music survived. Her music continued. and her music had a lasting impact on a number of singers who came after her. So that became, for me, that's Fortinbras. That became the moment. And it sort of lifted up the moment so that therefore there is a sense of, and things do survive and people do survive. So hopefully we've gone on the journey where we've seen the beauty of the possibility that is Levee be devastated, and the horror of that. And someone very early on said, I was, when I watched the film, I was completely devastated, but I didn't feel powerless. And that was sort of like,
they didn't feel powerless. They felt empowered.
Yeah, it was like if they felt some kind of call to, or that it didn't, like, I want to retreat and go hide under the covers for 10 years. So,
right.
And I think that's always, so I'm always perpetually digging to find those moments of defiance. And one of the things which I say to actors all the time, and I'm sure I probably said to you guys on Lucky Guys, which is, if you want me to stick around for the pain, you've got to invite me to the party. So while we're watching, so up until the point where it turns dark, you're seeing the joy of the language and the talking shit energy that's going on between the guys in the band. You're seeing Ma Rainey say "fuck you" and drink a Coca-Cola as slow as she possibly could. You're watching these moments of cultural defiance and cultural celebration and joy, and Levee taking that money. He could have bought a pair of brown shoes and a pair of black shoes, but no, he bought some yellow shoes.
Yes,
because he knows he looks good in them, and that's what he's going to wear on his first day of recording. So find these moments of extraordinary, of cultural and individual character celebration. And the way the language crackles and the way they play with each other and defy each other was all part of creating this buoyancy and this energy of discovery and possibility, so that therefore when something devastating happens, it's not just happening to them, it's hopefully happening to us as well.
To me, it's the artist, the possibility, the hope,
Absolutely.
That has to be the only thing that at times that can sustain us. That's why it's so important that we sit in these darkened spaces and let these things, these images, and as you say, these words pour all over us so we can be healed. We can see,
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And that's what the blues is. The blues, there are all kinds of, there's Mozart. If you want to listen to Mozart, you feel this sense of the exalted in Mozart. What the blues does, the blues is like, I can't go on. I'm devastated. I'm destroyed. Oh, but tomorrow. But there is tomorrow. And it's that human impulse inside of all of us. It's just sort of like,
But it's that human impulse that ultimately that defines Black people. Because Black people, that's all we had.
Yeah,
and we were in the middle of what we was, your mama, and you witnessed your daddy just dragged and hung and beat and burnt. But then there's tomorrow. Still, there's that hope.
Well, you have to continue. You have to continue. I would. One time I was in an elevator. I think I had just moved to New York, and I saw this extraordinary. And I was in this elevator, and there was this little boy, and his mother was there, and he wanted to touch the buttons. He wanted to touch the buttons to start the floor. And his mother said, "Don't you do that? Don't you do that?" And literally, it was like, it was at a point in time where I had no control over my life. I was poor, I was struggling in New York, and I saw him move his hand just to the left of where the buttons were and push buttons that were not there.
Wow.
That I'm still going to do the impulse that I have.
Wow.
I'm going to do that. I'm still going to do that. You told me I can't push those buttons. I'm going to make up some buttons and I'm going to push them. And I was just feeling so much joy. Once again, because I think I was poor and struggling, and what the hell am I going to eat today? But it's that impulse, the impulse of defiance, the impulse of also, it's like some people are talking about, there's a lot of talk in the film. Well, because it should be, because when other people are dictating where you can go, where you can sit, where you can live, where you're allowed to walk, stand, and breathe, you still have command over the stories that you can tell about yourself.
Mm.
And in the telling of the stories about yourself is a place where your dignity and your sense of power and play can live, can totally live. There's this extraordinary story about Williams and Walker, great vaudeville team. And they were Black vaudeville team, and they were performing in Texas, I think. And this was probably in the teens of the last century. And they've just started to make money. And they bought these suits that were sort of fabulous. And they finished up performing in this small Texas town. And a group of poor white people gathered around them, white men gathered around them, beat them up, and stole their clothes.
Of course.
After that, Williams and Walker, Burt Williams was one of the most successful performers. He was making more money than the president at the Ziegfeld Follies. After that, Walker Burt Williams, from that point on, dressed in a very modest way. Walker became even more flamboyant in his dress.
Of course.
And
that was his defiance.
What's his face's defiance was, Burt Williams' defiance was, and I will be the most successful person working in vaudeville. Fuck you. And George Walker said, and I will be the most outrageous. Look at this. It's the pushing of the buttons.
Pushing of the buttons. Wow.
No, you will not stop me. No, right. Levy, no, Ma, you will not stop me. I'm feeling the solo coming on. I'm going to strut downstage and I'm going to let everybody know that I'm feeling this solo going on. Right. And I going, no, we're going to shut this whole recording session down until I get my Coca-Cola. Yes, right. Is it arbitrary? But it's also hot. Give me my Coke. And once you give me, I will go for it. Those moments where Levy's recklessness and my sense of power can assert themselves, but also in that band room, these guys telling stories about who they are and where they come from, that's them asserting their definition of the self.
Well,
if you don't have control in the world, you do have control, hopefully, over your own story.
And I love that story, in that those two were able to still do what they did, even though they didn't do it in the way.
Yeah.
And they still were able to be successful. And give to the establishment. Unfortunately, Ma and Levy couldn't do the same thing and take themselves higher and say, to the man.
Yeah, but in a way she did. When she went to Georgia, she bought two theaters that she owned. She employed a ton of people. So she existed. She found a groove and she lived inside of that. She didn't conquer New York. She didn't end up in the pages of Vanity Fair, but she found a world and claimed it as her own.
Right.
And that was her victory. And that was her victory. And it's very important that you find your victories where you can and assert and use the power that you acquire to pave the way for other people.
Right. Well, George, I know they're going to give. I have to give my time to the crowd so they can ask you more questions. But I just want to say I would love the opportunity to talk more to you about some other things. So anytime you want to interview and talk about things and wax eloquent, just let me know.
I will do that. I will very much so. And while I'm sitting in New York where it's snow going on, I'm glad to see there's greenery in your background.
You like my background? You love my backyard?
I'm not hostile at all. But thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I know there's a Q&A about to happen now. So I think we're supposed to do something now. We're supposed to mute I have to mute myself and my video has to go away, but you stay there. And there's people going to talk to you.
I will mourn the loss of looking at you.
I know you will, but know that you are loved, deeply loved.
All right, absolutely. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George. Love you.
Okay, love you too, sir.
All right, we're going to get to some audience questions. We have plenty for you here, Mr. Wolfe. First up, someone would like to ask you what it was like working with Chadwick Boseman in the picture, and what was it like to work with his?
Chadwick is amazing artist and smart and hardworking and joyful and sweet and ferociously committed. I mean, ferociously committed. The guys had to, they had coaches for playing their instruments. And the first conversation that Chadwick and I had in person, he said, I want to get fingering for every single song that we're going to be playing. So I contacted Branford Marcellus, and he said he wants that. I said, yeah. And so he had somebody send it to him. And the rest of them were focused in on, and everybody did an extraordinary job. But Chadwick says he wanted to get the fingering exact. And there was this fascinating moment. We filmed, I think the number was Hear Me Talking to You, and we filmed it one day and got it. And then we were moving on to one of the 9,000 other things that we were doing. And at one point he came up to me and he said, George, look at this. And we'd already gotten the moment. He had been working on still the fingering for Hear Me Talking to You. He was that sort of driven to get it right. And that's just, that was him. And he was very, very, just hardworking. We had our 2-week rehearsal period, as I mentioned, and then once a week, at least once or twice a week, he would come up to me while we were filming and saying, "Thank God we had those 2 weeks." And he was just joyful, and he sent me a script about something that he wanted me to direct, a film script, and I sent him about something that I wanted him to act in. So it was, there was this, we were talked about doing a play together. So there was while the work was happening, there was also this incredible conversation that we would have about the future and how we would work together. So it was, and I the ferocity of his commitment and the passion didn't give me any kind of signal that there was anything going on with him. So when the world found out, I found out as well.
Now you mentioned the 2 weeks. As someone said that the set felt very lived in. Is that a part of the 2 weeks? Were you, rehearsing on set, or did that play into it at all?
No. We rehearsed in an old Lithuanian community center in Pittsburgh, which was scorching hot. And if you turned on the air conditioning, it felt like it was raining in the room, and the air conditioning screamed like, ah! So it was so we got accustomed to the heat and playing with the heat, because we were rehearsing probably the end of July, the last 2 weeks of July. And so we did that. So no, it really wasn't about obeying the environment, but I had to bring in the 4 columns. So just to get a sense of that, so that therefore the guys were very, so they were aware of the space. But then what ended up happening, we filmed all of Viola's stuff first. So for the band, every single thing that happened in that room, we did last. So that last week, jumping back to Chadwick, every day was a monster week to him. Oh, it's Monday, you're cursing God. Okay, Tuesday, you're talking. It was just a monster week, but it was, it's very interesting. And one of the things that I wanted was from the space was this extraordinary sense of history. Ma Rainey recorded with Paramount. August chose to not have it be Paramount. But one of the things that Mark Ricker, the production designer, and his team found out that the Paramount Studios in Chicago were behind a chair making factory. So on the scene where you can see all these chairs in front, and also that space where the recording is happening, whereas the band is on the floor and the recording equipment is in this raised box. That to me would also be where the managers of the factory would watch the workers. while they were slaving away and making whatever it was they were making before this became a recording studio. So I always wanted to have, and it's very important that that spaces feel haunted by what they used to be. When I can, I prefer finding, environments that have a life, because then you can't paint that. But I think everything ended up having this wonderful look because I wanted the environment, to be haunted, that band room to be haunted, the streets of Chicago to be haunted, the woods with those two guys running at the very beginning of the film, to have a sense that it's haunted by a history that is complicated and dark and extraordinary, because it's a place where pain and possibility both live.
And that brings me to this other question they have, Levy and Ma Rainey's intergenerational trauma that happened is haunting as well. Can you talk about how that played into the production?
Well, it's as I was speaking with Courtney, they need each other, but they don't know that they need each other, and it's never ever a good idea to sleep with your boss's girlfriend. So that's things are not going to end well. That's just not smart. But also, it's and so Ma, who should know better because she's older, but she's also an artist who is facing a winding down of her career, is threatened by the future. And so that's why she can't make herself available. And Levy, the fact of the trauma, and it was trauma, the trauma of what happened to his mother and his father have left him, it's not to say that relatives didn't step in and help to raise him, but in many respects, he's raised himself, so that when the other characters try to tell him something, he's not available because he's trapped in the trauma of those people who were raising him got destroyed. One physically got destroyed and one psychologically got destroyed. So there are frequently people who are in our lives who are telling us things that we need to hear, but because of our own frailties and our own fears, we don't receive that information. And that was, and that was one of the things. And at one point, I remember talking to Viola, and she was running up a list. Well, first he tries to upstage me this, and then he does this, and then he does this, and then I just don't like him. I just don't like him. So, and I just said, I don't like it. I just don't like him. I don't like it. So, and I love that. It's like, there's A, B, C, D, and then I just don't like him as a human being. Let it can get lost. Fuck him. Yeah.
We got a question here about how you create the visual style and look with your cinematographer, Tobias Slicer.
Oh, Tobias. He and I had a glorious collaboration. I adored him. One of the things that I said to him, to visual effects, to everybody, I said, I want to see the heat. I don't want to just see the sweat on them. I want it to, it's like one of those urban horrible days that happen in New York City or happen in urban environments where it's so hot, you can just see the heat descending on you. So that was a visual image that I gave him. I talked to him about the band room, and once again, how it was a boxing ring, and I said, this is Raging Bull, but instead of Raging Bull, but instead of punches, it's the language. So these people are constantly flinging words at each other and punching and jabbing and punching and jabbing. And the thing that brings it together is music. And that's what allows them to coexist and to forgive each other. And then at the end of the film, when the tragedy happens, they put their instruments away so they can't fall back on that. I also, I went on an interesting journey in terms of that band room, because I wanted a sense of no exit. I wanted a sense of there was no escape. There was one door out. And that's why that other door became to me so, why Levy was so obsessed with this. And then Mark talked about a window. I don't want a window. And he talked about a window. I don't want a window. And then once it was put in, I said, put it in and let's see it. And because it was so high up, I was reassured that there could be no escape. And then when Tobias lit it for the first time, then it became a Caravaggio painting to me, and in his paintings, the walls are dark, and the background is dark, and his characters are on display. And so this light floating down from above became exalted. So I started to view all of these scenes like living, moving, breathing Caravaggio paintings.
And we got another question about Glenn Turman. What was it like to work with him?
Glenn's great. Glenn is a, you know, there are actors who've been doing it so long and whose craft is part of their blood system, so that therefore you don't see the effort, you know, and his legacy. I mean, you know, the thing, you know, Glenn has this extraordinary long career, but Glenn was also, and he told me stories about this, Glenn was the Travis, the little boy in A Raisin in the Sun on Broadway when he was 10 years old. So Glenn was acting on Broadway when he was 10 or 11 years old in Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun with Sidney Poitier and Ruby Dee and Claudia McNeil and all these extraordinary people. So finding somebody with not only that legacy, but the skill set that legacy evokes is thrilling to work with, you know.
We got time for one last question, and it's what's the thought behind directing a stage monologue in film? How do you go about that?
I wasn't hired to direct the stage, anything for the stage. I was hired to direct film. So I just pushed that aside. I just played a game with myself. I said, this piece has been written for the film. And there were things that I did with Ruben cutting. I think the film ends up cutting about 30 to 40 minutes worth of material because in the play, the structure of the play exists for about 40 minutes of the guys telling stories with each other. They're brilliant, brilliant stories while they're waiting on Ma to show up. And I wanted to change that and see Ma very, very early in the movie. But you know, you go on the journey of trying to, I think with any piece of writing, as a director and as an actor, if I believe that if one can locate the intimacy and the urgency inside of the material, it will breathe. And so that intimacy is brought about by you ingesting those words and then imbuing them with your pain and your truth and your discoveries, so that therefore we aren't watching a writer's work, we're watching a human being tell a story. So that falls very heavily on the actor and me working with the actor to do what I can to support, nurture, push, shove, you know, gently take them on that journey of embodying intimacy. And then the other thing is finding the stakes of the urgency. Why this has to come out of this person's mouth at this point in time? Why it has to? So that therefore, if one can locate that sense of urgency, then you go on the journey. At one point, one of Levy's stories that he tells about what happened to his mother and father, I shot these series of little like flashes of images that I was going to put in there. Just flash of a hand pushing the hand back up, or this wonderful, really compelling image of a jug of milk being knocked off the table, and the splash of the whiteness into that space. You know, I came up with all these things that were, I think, visually interesting and compelling. And then as I started editing, I went, no, I'm not putting that in. 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 And I feel as though that in many respects, by the nature of the combustion that had been achieved rhythmically and visually with the dynamics in the band room prior to Ma's arrival, I felt as though the film had earned a stillness. And in that stillness, you got to witness an astonishing performance by Chadwick, but it was a moment where Levy's pain became the spectacle. I mean, they can film their spectacles, you know, the guys running, my performing. There's a visual spectacle. And this was another kind of spectacle. And the spectacle was his pain. And so I felt as though we'd earned that. And so that's how it was crafted the way it was crafted.
You absolutely earned it. It was a beautiful film. Thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. And I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in tonight at home watching the conversation. Any last words you would like to say, Mr. Wolfe, before we?
No. Thank you. It's you know, it's fun. It's you know, I've done X amount of press. You know, on this project. It's very interesting. When I started, my brain wouldn't let me use past tense when talking about Chadwick. Just wouldn't let me do it. And you know, and so that, you know, so that's, I somehow relaxed into that, you know, and it's just fun, you know, and now now I'm having just fun just talking about a movie that I worked very hard on and everybody worked very hard on, and I'm very proud of it. So, you know, and I adore Courtney, so it was fun. So, and thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.